Good morning. Every year, more than 3 million animals are the victims, is a word that could be used, of laboratory experiments. They suffer, but many people say that it helps you and I lead healthier lives. It's an emotive business, an emotive argument. Last year, indeed, here in Bristol, there was an attempt to kill an animal research scientist, so far as is known, by animal rights activists. Now, a group of doctors from all over the world is campaigning to stop animal experiments. They say that they've never saved any lives and no new cures have been developed. And this is going to be the subject of, I hope, a thoughtful, analytical argument today, which will present two sides of the argument. Whether it'll provide the answer, I don't know. If I may start off with you, your son is a diabetic.
That's right, yes.
Now, how crucial do you think the drug that keeps him going day in, day out has been via animal experimentation?
Well, he would be dead without it. I think the average life of a diabetic before Banting and Best did their experiments on dogs was 18 months. And Neil has had diabetes now for 4 years, and without it, he would be dead.
And your clear understanding of the past is that the development of insulin was directly from a result of experimentation on animals.
Oh yes, they had I think it was over 300 dogs, and the last one lived. And as I understand it as a layperson, they actually took the pancreases out of these animals, ground up healthy pancreases from I don't know where, and injected them in quite a rough injection form. And on the 300th and whatever, Marjorie, I think her name was, she lived. And ever since then, children, especially children, because they need insulin straight away, there is no chance of pills for children, and other dogs have lived.
And you can be optimistic about your son's future from
Yes.
here right the way through a normal life, so long as he has that injection every day.
Yes, together with a healthy diet.
Yes. If I can move to you, you unfortunately cannot be as optimistic at the present situation. HIV positive. What do you think about the need for animal experiments as a vital need of finding a way out?
I'd rather people try and find alternatives, because I am against animal testing.
And even if you believed that animal testing could produce an answer, you would still vote against it?
Obviously, if a cure was made available, if I could return it to absolute normal health, and the only sort of medication or whatever was tested on animals, then yes, I would have to contradict myself and consider taking that medication.
I understand your two sides of the argument. I mean, one side, you care very much about animals, you don't want them to suffer, but another side, you are potentially very ill, and if you could be sure that a cure could be found...
Yeah, I have a natural instinct to want to survive, therefore,
of course,
if that was the only treatment available, I'm afraid I would have to contradict myself and consider taking that medication.
And Bill, cancer situation?
Yes, I've been struggling with this sort of notion for a few days since being asked to be on the show, and in the end I've got to say that I think that people are more important than animals. It's a terrible... The worst human being is better than the best animal. You know, that a killer whale, say, isn't as good as, say, Charles Manson. You know, that people are very important.
So that whilst you would demand that the experiments on animals are as kind as is possible, you
yes.
still, at the end of the day, would say...
It's a very reluctant position, but if I had to take it, animals have to be used. If I can be convinced otherwise, I'll just change my mind, because I've benefited, obviously, for the last year and a half from animal experimentation, or so I understand.
I mean, the medication which is helping you along the road is
right.
Stems from animal experimentation, as far as you know.
Yes, as far as I know.
Well, 3 cases where, I mean, no matter how much the love of animals, at the end of the day, you feel if the door can be opened to help your lives, it should be. Dr. Vernon Coleman, I think, is going to actually say that none of you need that door to be opened by animals. But whether you can prove it or not is a different matter.
Well, I think we can prove it. When I say we, I'm president of an organisation which is an international organisation with doctors from 28 different countries, from Russia, America, everywhere around the world. who are opposed, we've got nearly 600 members already, who are opposed to animal experiments on scientific grounds, not on emotional grounds. It's very interesting, actually, that a few years ago, the opponents of animal experiments were accused of being emotional and saying that they disapproved of animal experiments because they felt sorry for animals. Today, the people who support animal experiments, and there's a big industry out there which supports animal experiments, which depends on animal experiments. There's a huge industry making restraints for animals, breeding animals. These people have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. And because they cannot argue scientifically against us, they are now arguing emotionally. They are now producing patients and saying, we have saved this patient's life. This, I'm afraid, is a myth. The simple truth is that animal experiments have actually held back medical advances, and without animal experiments, we would be much better off. If you've only got to look at history.
How can you prove that?
Well, you can, for example, very quick example, when Fleming discovered penicillin by accident, he gave it to a cat and he gave it to a human being. The cat died and the human being survived. Now, Fleming was intelligent enough and less hindered by restrictions than our modern scientists. He continued to give the penicillin to human beings. If that had been today, we wouldn't have penicillin because the cat had died. Human beings and animals are extremely different.
But that is an isolated example. It isn't proof across a whole spectrum,
well,
is it?
Have we got 3 days for me to give you lists of
No.
examples? Well, of course we haven't. The point is that there are a lot of myths used by the people who oppose animal experiments. And you have only got to look at a rat or a cat or a monkey or a dog in anatomical or physiological terms to realize that the 50, 60,000 experiments we do each week are pointless as far as medicine is concerned because the results you get are dangerously misleading. Look at thalidomide. It was thoroughly tested on animals. All sorts of drugs have been thoroughly tested on animals, and only afterwards have they been found to cause problems. The big difficulty is, you see, that you test drugs like thalidomide or a whole range of drugs on animals, you get results which seem to convince you that the drug is safe. And then on the basis of those results, you give the drug to vast quantities of people. When they first gave the tranquilizers to human beings, there were no addictive problems. Of course there weren't. Animals don't suffer from addictive problems. Rats don't vomit. You give drugs. There are no animals which suffer from high blood pressure. How on earth can you test a high blood pressure
You
drug on an
presented your
animal?
case. I have to get your opponent on stage. When I've had your expert opposite opinion, I want to get ordinary members of Joe Public to try to work out which way they jump, having heard these two arguments. You have heard the argument for the preservation of animals in all circumstances. You're in an organisation which says that's nonsense.
Well, I've heard an argument which says that animal experimentation has never played any part in medical advances. I think people should know that Vernon Coleman is a medical journalist with a particularly well-known and rather strong point of view on this, which doesn't actually correspond to present-day scientific or medical knowledge in any way. I mean, if you consult medical textbooks, the journals of medicine, if you consult any of the major leading medical or medical research organisations, the World Medical Association, the Royal Colleges of Medicine, essentially you'll be told, quite simply, that medical history has shown that for quite a large number of very important medical advances, vaccines for polio and diphtheria, tissue transplantation, heart transplant, open heart surgery, and the list, too, could go on for 3 or 4 days. Animal experimentation, in the past, played a quite essential role in those developments. One could argue philosophically, if we never had animal experimentation, would it have been possible to make those advances?
That's the question I wanted to ask you.
That's a philosophical argument. What happened was, when medical research was done, it was essential to use animal experiments to make those advances. Now we're faced with a situation where there are still a lot of killer diseases, cancer, AIDS. There are diseases we don't yet have effective treatments for. Now, if we're going to go ahead and find those treatments, if you're looking at heart disease, I mean, there are plenty of alternative techniques which are used. In fact, animal experimentation only constitutes a minority of medical research. But there are certain essential bits of research. If you want to look at the effect of a drug on a beating heart, that has to be done in an animal experiment. No test tube technique has a beating heart.
So what you're saying is that there may be various routes to find a cure to a situation, but you regard animal experimentation as one that should remain on the map. That route should not be crossed out, because it is one of the essential routes.
It is,
Mike-
in quite a lot of areas.
Mike,
No, I'm not going to let another expert come in. I want some members of the Joe public. You have heard two... No, I'm not going to let you come in now. Joe public, who wants to argue which way?
Experiment which are not true. See, he's mentioned polio. Well, the polio vaccine was not developed as a result of animal experiments.
Will you let ordinary members of the public express a view, please? Thank you. You've heard two views. One saying it is an essential ingredient. Maybe there are other ingredients work, but it's an essential ingredient. The other saying it is not an essential ingredient.
The whole nature of our society would have been different today if it had not been for the fact that many people, myself included, owe their lives to Marjorie. Marjorie was a dog, the dog used by Banting and Best in Toronto in 1921. South Africa, for one place, would have been an entirely different scene now because Archbishop Tutu, although not a diabetic, was introduced into his career by a well-known diabetic, Trevor Huddleston, who owed his life to the...
To the dog?
To Marjorie, yes.
So you're
like
saying if that dearly beloved dog Marjorie had not had its life sacrificed, because it didn't volunteer, let's face it.
Oh, no, that's true.
Had not had its life sacrificed, in your belief, all sorts of diabetics would not have been able to stay alive the way they have.
That's right, and society would have suffered
I think
by the loss of those people.
You see, the argument that you will face is people will say Marjorie was helpful, but there were other routes that could equally well have found the cure.
No, I don't think so. Definitely not. Not in the case of Ileton, as it was first called. And the method used was quite interesting. They had to... It was quite cruel, really. They had to tie off the certain of the ducts to the pancreas in the dogs that were sacrificed to keep Marjorie alive until the pancreas itself started to rot.
So there was an element of distinct...
It was cruel. But,
yeah?
I've completely forgotten what I was going to say. No, I think I'm not Joe Public entirely because I'm a veterinary surgeon, but I don't think anybody really would say that animal experimentation in the past has not brought great benefit to mankind. But I think that perhaps we've now reached the point where we need to ask the question, haven't we got enough? I mean, are we going to go on and on and on until all disease is curable and we are all immortal? And is that a possible goal anyway?
Well, let me chuck the question at you. As a veterinary surgeon, you've got a particular interest in this. I mean, let's talk about the dreaded HIV-positive situation, which the world wants to find an answer to. If you, as a veterinary surgeon, were approached by a research scientist who said, I believe that if we can get 100 of whatever animal, dogs, cats, whatever, to conduct some experiments on, we could take a significant step forward, what would your answer be?
You see, I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair to say this person is going to die, that person is going to die, that one would have died. It brings a very individual element into what should be a philosophical argument which we need to find answers to in the large. I wouldn't want to have to make a decision about myself, for instance, and it puts me in a poor position because I'm clearly a healthy person and my relatives aren't dying. So that when I say, I think that we should stop all animal experimentation, we have enough antibiotics, we've got plenty of drugs and many techniques, now's the time to say these poor animals haven't got a choice. They don't say, yes, that's okay, you can go and experiment on me for the greater good. I think we might say mankind's had their day, and it's time to look to alternatives which no longer abuse other species.
Dr. Janet, where are you? You work in an unnamed pharmaceutical business. You are in laboratories where you see a lot of animals come in and go through the experimentation process. What is your daily instinct when you're doing that job? Do you, in any sense, feel repulsed by the job you're doing? Do you feel it's essential? What?
Well, if I could answer that question by commenting on what's gone before, which has been very interesting. I think if we pick up the diabetes question, I think our patients have spoken very well for the benefit they've received from those initial animal experiments. And I agree with the last speaker that I don't think anyone would doubt that animal experimentation has helped those individuals. But if we look on a very positive way, look what has now happened for the supply of insulin. Now, the control of diabetes through insulin started with the animal experiments you've spoken about with tying off the pancreas. Then insulin was given to individuals, such as the lad along here, which was derived from animals. And now, of course, with the power of genetic engineering, he can now be treated with human insulin derived genetically. Now, that's the sort of progression that I believe illustrates what the essentials of what we're talking about, that animal experiments are highly necessary to understand physiology and pathology. They are important in the early development of drugs, and we progress to other means which do not require animals.
I want to chuck the difficult question at you, see, because I think it's an absolutely essential one we've got to table, and that is the extent to which those animal experiments cause pain and anguish. To what animals? I mean, I think it's one thing if there is a mouse that is experimented on and is dead 30 seconds later. But I want to know where the line is drawn. What animals are experimented? How do the experiments happen? What pain do they cause? What happens to a dog that is in a laboratory having an experiment done upon it?
Well, I mean, we can pick up several of these points. I mean, I don't think we as human beings should make judgments about which animals are important and which are not. I think all animals are important, and both the last speaker and I, as veterinary surgeons, have a major responsibility for ensuring their welfare. So I don't want this panel, if you like, to feel that dogs are more important than rats. I think all animals are important. That's the first part of the answer.
The truth of the matter about the ordinary British public is that they love dogs and cats very much more than they love cows, sheep, pigs, etc.
That is true, but you're talking to a British audience. That would not be true worldwide, of course. I mean, on the continent, people would be just as happy to eat equine horse meat as they would bovine. So I don't think that is a valid argument. I think we are responsible for animals and their welfare, whatever they are. And I would not like the audience to think that if it's a mouse that's suffering, that is less important than if it's some other species.
Do you believe the standards of avoiding the pain that the animal suffers are correctly adhered to?
Yes, I do. Certainly we've always had veterinary surgeons who have been in this area, and I'm one myself. We are concerned with welfare, and in more recent years, of course, it's part of the legislation that before anything is done to an animal in terms of drug discovery or drug development, you have to define what you believe the level of distress to that animal will be, and you have to write down and then implement anything that you are going to do to ameliorate it.
Dr. Vernon is, I know, anxious to challenge that, and I'm going to give you a chance to, after I want to just talk to two people. Are the two people here who have looked into this matter and who are horrified by what happens to animals? Are you horrified by what happens to animals?
Yeah.
Do you know specific situations which have made you really appalled?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually been on the H floor of Bristol University's laboratories, and I've seen the cats, I've seen the sheep, and I think all animals are equal, and I think that it's just as bad to do it on a rat as it is to a cat. But I mean, this lady here, I don't know what company she works for, but at the end of the day, it's a commercial company, and at the end of the day, it's their profits they're going to be looking at, whether it's an ICI, whether it's Boots and the High Street Chemist.
No more names, please.
Sorry, they all use animals, so I'm just making examples, and so, you know, I think it should all be sort of think at the end of the day it's profits, not people they're worried about.
We're going to have to pause. Can I have two quick views? You wanted to say about something, a quick one from you before we pause, yes?
Yes, I just wanted to make a point.
There's a dog down here, I should tell you.
There's two dogs down here. That's right. And I'd just like to make a moralistic point more than anything, actually, starting off by saying, since when did two wrongs make a right? Since when did it make it right that animals anywhere should have to suffer because somebody else is already suffering? And there's a couple of sick points I'd like to make about vivisection in general. It's well known that the beagle is a popular breed to use in laboratories for experiments. And that is, on the whole, the one that is bred inside laboratories and for the sale to laboratories to be used. The reason that they pick the beagle to use is because it's renowned as a soft-natured beast, which is far less likely to struggle, bite back, and cause so much trouble when it's in great distress and great pain and being experimented on.
So you are talking specifically for one animal, actually.
Right, but one very quick specific point again as well. Another point is that in the Drey's eye irritancy test, where rabbits are used, held in stocks, to test various poisons, makeups, chemicals, the like, etc., see what damage might be done to the eye, the rabbit is used because of all animals. It doesn't have natural tear ducts. It cannot wash the substance away. You can imagine the pain, therefore, the poor rabbit goes into.
Dr. Vernon, I've got to go into a break. Can I ask you to give me a sort of very short view before we go into the break?
Very briefly, the two experts that have opposed my point of view. In other words, the two experts that you've spoken to so far who support animal experiments seem to me to be representing organisations which have a vested and presumably commercial interest in maintaining animal experiments, which is very interesting because you won't find many ordinary doctors who are prepared to support that point of view because they realise, as I do, that it's based on a myth. The important thing as far as animals are concerned is that there are 10, 12,000 animal experiments will be done today in Britain. 70% of them will be done without any anaesthetic. The animal experiments will be done on cats, dogs, baboons, any animal you care to name. And the suffering that those animals go through when you read the scientific journal papers would make anyone watching this programme feel sick. I know of researchers who sew up the eyes of newborn kittens, sew up the eyelids of newborn kittens so that they can't see. There's a chap in Oxford does this, and then inject chemicals into their brains and then kill them. That's the sort of experiment we're talking about. We're not talking about little experiments done with just a few insects. We're talking about 3.5 million experiments a year in this country. The figure's hardly fallen. 70% without any anaesthetic.
Well, a particularly horrifying form of experimentation... I'm sorry, we're going into a break. A particular horrifying form of experimentation has been tabled, although the extent to which that is a tiny percentage or a large percentage, at the present I don't know. What I do know is that in part two we're going to be talking to Dr. Chiswell. Where are you, Dr. Chiswell? There. Who will certainly demonstrate that in some areas, scientific breakthroughs are such that animal experimentation will not be necessary. Whether that can apply to all areas is another matter. Back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back. Before the end of this programme, we may well try to get some indication of who in the studio would vote for a continuation and who in the studio would vote against a continuation of animal experiments. We'll see how the discussion goes. But if I may start off by going to Dr. Chiswell there. Doctor, you are a scientific experimental expert in a specific medical field.
That's right.
And at the moment, your specific medical field is optimistic about the need for no further experimentation. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes. In our particular field, we established a company just over a year ago with the aim of developing key reagents for diagnostic tests and therapeutics without the use of animals. In our case, the animals are mice. Now, I agree with the earlier statement that all animals are equal.
All animals are animals?
All animals are animals, yes. By the work that's been going on for 5 years in medical research centres throughout this country and in work in our company, we've now made advances that we know that in sometime in the future, probably 2-3 years, maybe 5, we'll be able to develop these key reagents without the use of animals. Okay?
But, I mean, you work in a specific field. You can't actually look over the whole spectrum of medical problems and feel as optimistic about everywhere,
no,
can you?
absolutely not. In fact, rather the opposite. I think there are clearly some areas where you need to use animals. I think what that does, to scientists as well as the general public, it gives us a responsibility for looking at the areas where we can avoid the use of animals and trying to do so. Because there are some areas where we cannot avoid the use of animals. So we have to look in our own minds and say, do we need to do this experiment?
Well, before I bring in Joe Puppet, let me talk to Dr. Manners. Now, I mean, here we have a situation in which a medical expert has said, yes, in a specific field, our experimentation, our scientific analysis indicates we can stop. In other fields, we're not so sure. Can you accept that as a reasonable statement? It sounds to me to be a reasonable statement.
It's on the way to it. It's on the way to it. I think with animal experiments, it's a thing of the past, basically, now, and that we should progress into other techniques and other methods of being able to do the self-same thing. If we take our young laddie over here with his diabetes, we are not curing the condition, we are supplementing it. We're giving him what the organ can't do. But we should have progressed far enough now to be able to get the organ to function in a normal way. And I think that is basically where we're heading. I think drugs, I mean, is if you look back through medicine, drugs are only another phase of progression through medical experience. But you see, I mean, a little discussion we had just before the program in which they state that they now find animals which have a system almost identical to the human being. That may be so, but before you can experiment on a particular drug on that animal, you have to create in that animal the illness, the sickness, or the disease. In other words, you've got to give that animal the disease before you can attempt to cure it. Now,
well, yes, that is the ultimate unkindness. Let's put it in technicolor terms. There is a cancer problem.
Yes.
It is thought that experimentation on an animal might produce an answer. Therefore, a monkey is deliberately injected with cancer cells in order that it develops cancer, in order that the experimentation can resolve it one way or the other. You are saying that would be outrageously unacceptable. I think other people here might say, so be it. If it has to be, it has to be.
Wait a minute, just a minute. It's not necessarily outrageous, but it is basically stupid, for the simple reason that an animal's reaction is not the same as the human being. It's completely different. You create a cancer in a monkey, but that is not the same reaction. There is not the same symptoms. There's not the same anything basically in that monkey that there is in the human being.
Bill, as a man with cancer.
As a cancer person, I'd rather that he was a monkey than me, frankly. I was thinking, can I just say this one point, is that during the war in Germany, Jews were experimented on by lots of doctors because it was deemed that Jews weren't human beings. Some of the results of those experiments are still being used now with deep refrigeration heart surgery. You know, and I sometimes get rather worried that there could be a change of government and suddenly people with...
Adolf Hitler might re-emerge.
I hope that left-handed people aren't human or something.
They've actually stopped using those experiments now because they found that they were so badly structured that the results that they got were useless, which is the same as most animal experiments. The point about cancer...
I would like you, and I would also like my RSPCA gentleman to come in. I mean, I think that a lot of this argument centres around the allegations of appalling cruelty. I can understand that where there is appalling cruelty, there is every argument for saying the line must be drawn. But I wonder whether it should be drawn right at the bottom. Can I ask you, and then can I come to you?
I think that there are two aspects of animal experiments. One, we've dealt with considerably here, the use of animals as experimental models to test treatments. But animals, in my viewpoint, also have a more important role in understanding how we work. And mammals all work, by and large, the same way. And the statements that they are unrepresentative of humans is not true. We've learned a lot about how we as animals function as a result of animal experiments. And in my professional lifetime, and I'm a doctor, it's changed dramatically. And on that basis, almost on a daily basis, I make diagnoses using materials which were derived from animal experiments, but which are now produced in non-animal ways, exactly the evolutionary process which we've had described
before. If we as human beings are animals, might there not be an argument for carrying out the experiments on us rather than
back
the
to
animals?
Hitler. If you want that sort of thing, yes, but we don't accept that.
So we are superior animals, and therefore we as superior animals have a right for the experiments to be carried out on the inferior animals.
I wouldn't say that.
Sorry to be naughty,
we have an intelligence which God gave us, which allows us to inquire into the world around us, which other animals have not been given. And we, with that intelligence, can utilize it to investigate how the world works and to the benefit not only of humans, but of other animals, as we've heard during the course of it. So I think animal experiments...
Do you think it's a ridiculous argument? Why?
Yeah. Well,
you think that animals should be given every bit the same amount of care, concern, thoughtful consideration as human beings because we're all one?
Yes, I mean, the argument that this gentleman has put forward is the same sort of argument that would allow you to, God forbid, experiment on brain-damaged children. It's not a question of intelligence, it's a question of whether they can suffer or not.
Can I bring in our RSPCA, gentlemen? I mean, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, a very substantial title, I would have thought ought to be tabling a very substantial view on this subject.
Well, the basic line of our on animal experimentation is that we are opposed to all painful experiments. That's, you know, a very categorical statement on the subject. Having said that, one of the things that we haven't really dealt with, I don't think, in the discussion is the situation as it is at this present time. Now, I'm sure that, or well, I would hope that all of us here would like to wave the magic wand to end animal experiments tomorrow. Now, if we're being realist, we absolutely know that's not possible.
Why?
Well, because if you canvass the general public, I think you would find that the majority would still want certain experiments to continue. And I think that would certainly probably be the case in medical experiments. So there is the reality of the situation. But having said that, I think one of the big problems very often is that you get extreme views being expressed on both sides. We are led to believe sometimes by certain societies that every single experiment that's being carried out is valuable, and there is a valuable end product, and it's either helped animals in the future or ourselves. On the other hand, of course, there is the argument that no experiments have been any use whatsoever since time immemorial. And the vast majority of people don't actually accept either of those two views. One of the ways in which the organisation is working, our organisation is working, is to actually try to gain the dialogue with the people who are doing the experiments. You can abuse them all you like, you can threaten them, but at the end of the day, we actually want to help the animals who are in the laboratories now. And there are many